Welcome to this press conference.
各位媒介朋友
Friends of the media. Today, we'd like to brief the media on the work of the Health Committee. First off, I've been inviting the Vice Chair, Mr. Dennis Kwok, to brief you on the work pertaining to bills, subsidiary legislation, and then policy matters.
Has the Secretary provided the figures? Good. In this legislative session, the House Committee held 30 regular meetings and 2 special meetings with the Chief Secretary of Administration to discuss the NBCSC's interpretation of Article 104 of the Basic Law of the Hong Kong SAR on the taking of oaths and the development of the Hong Kong Palace Museum in the West Kowloon Cultural District. According to the legislative program submitted to the Legislative Council, the administration proposed to table 27 bills in the Council in this legislative session, of which 24 bills were tabled. Together with 4 bills not in the program, the administration has altogether tabled 28 bills in this legislative session so far. Another government bill not in the program, namely Road Tunnels Government Amendment Bill 2017, will be tabled in the Council tomorrow, and that is the 12th of July. In addition, Mr. Roderick Chan also tabled on the 24th of May 2017 in the Bank of Communications Hong Kong Limited Merger Bill. Regarding Bills Committee, in this legislative session, the House Committee set up a total of 25 Bills Committee to examine 26 government bills and 1 member's bill. The government bills include the Private Column Barrier Bill, Travel Industry Bill, Inland Revenue Amendment Bill 2017, Protection of Endangered Species of Animals and Plants Amendment Bill 2017, and Apology Bill. Although Chair of the House Committee and myself have repeatedly urged the administration to table the bills as soon as possible, only 6 bills in the administration's legislative program were tabled in the first half of the session. 18 bills were tabled in the second half of the session, 14 of which were tabled at the end of April or later, and 5 of which were tabled at the council meeting of the 28th of June. 3 bills in the legislative program have not yet been tabled in the Council. That is, Waste Disposal, Medical Devices Bill, and Financial Reporting Council Amendment Bill. In relation to subsidiary legislation, in this session, members scrutinized 173 items of subsidiary legislation, 1 technical memorandum, and 18 resolutions proposed by the government. The House Committee set up a total of 32 subcommittees to study 54 items of subsidiary legislation and 8 resolutions, such as 7 technical and legislative amendments on traffic arrangements with the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, Product Eco-Responsibility Regulated Electrical Equipment Regulation to implement the recycling and proper disposal of regulated electrical equipment, and Smoking Public Health Notices Amendment Order 2017 to expand the coverage of health warning on the packet or retail container of tobacco products. The House Committee also considered 11 items of subsidiary legislation not required to be tabled in the Council, 8 of which were made under the United Nations Sanctions Ordinance. The committee had referred them to the subcommittee to examine the implementation in Hong Kong of resolutions of the United Nations Security Council in relation to sanctions for consideration. In terms of policy issues and other council business, in this legislative session, the House Committee agreed to set up 5 subcommittees on a number of policy issues, including the Subcommittee on Children's Rights, Subcommittee on Rights of Ethnic Minorities, the 3-1 system, retirement protection, and issues relating to bazaars. 2 subcommittees on policy issues under the House Committee are on the waiting list. they will be in action soon, and namely subcommittee on issues relating to shopping centres, markets in PRH and HOS estates, and the subcommittee to follow up on the USM for non-refoulement claims. And please refer to the Secretariat's leaflets for the above figures. We welcome questions.
Thank you, Dennis. This session is the first year of the term. I believe that the members of the public would expect members from across the political divide, old and new, to monitor the administration and to discuss economic and livelihood issues in a pragmatic way and shake off the stalemate that saw the social development grind to a halt, the lack of trust between the executive and part of the legislature, and constant wrangling. But as you can see, at the beginning of this session, a lot has happened inside and outside the council. I remember in particular the oath-taking controversy, and that strained the relationship among members. And given this atmosphere, it would be hard for us to proceed with our work smoothly, not least at the Finance Committee, the PwC, and the ESC. The work has been progressing at a slow pace. However, I'm pleased to see that members are pretty proactively pursuing and discussing matters of concern to society through panels and subcommittees. What is of note is that no sooner had we started than 10 subcommittees were up and running under the House Committee and the panels to look at various policies. Examples are Subcommittee on Animal Rights, Subcommittee on Refuse Collection and Resource Recycling, and Subcommittee on Ethnic Minorities. Various subcommittees and under panels are actively monitoring the administration in their respective spheres. I hope that the administration will consider members' comments in depth, mull over the reports, and follow up on the recommendations. As chairman of the House, I am of the view that LegCo's interaction with the mainland should become normalized. The House Committee approved the proposal for the Development Panel to conduct a 2-day duty visit to Guangdong in April 2017 for members to have a better understanding of the water supply system from Dongjiang, and also gain first-hand information on measures taken by Guangdong Authority to ensure water quality. I'm pleased to see that 18 members were part of the visit, and they were from across the political divide. I hope that there would be more opportunities for us to engage in exchanges and duty visits in the mainland to foster better understanding. Where necessary, we would hold special meetings on matters involving considerable public interest and invite the administration to respond to members and explain government policies. As the Vice Chair reported, we've had 2 special meetings in this session with the CS and other government officials. In terms of legislative work, during our meetings with the CS, we've been urging the administration to make available the legislative program as soon as possible. In March this year, in our meeting with the CS told the Vice Chair and myself that he has already instructed the Bureau directors to carry out advanced consultation work prior to introduction of the bills. I'd like to mention that of the 28 bills introduced to the floor of the Council, 19 were submitted after March. Some of them involve important bills, like Travel Industry Bill, Private Healthcare Facilities Bill, and Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017. I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate that members must have sufficient time to scrutinize the provisions of the bills, not least the complicated and controversial ones. Therefore, the administration has to submit the bills as soon as possible. That's absolutely crucial. I understand the relationship between the executive and the legislature has not been good over the years. I believe that both branches have the obligation to have regard to overall interest and somehow mend the relations. This is the expectation the public would pin on us. In our meetings with the CS, myself and Dennis expressed the hope that in rolling out policies, the administration should heed the views of members from across the political spectrum, understand their concerns and recommendations. It is my hope that in the next 3 years, the members would engage in rational discussion on subjects of public concern, foster cooperation, and strengthen public trust in the Council. In our meeting with the CS on the 3rd of July, I expressed the hope that the new term of administration will step up communication and interaction with members. And I urged the new CS to have regard to the policy objectives, review and reprioritize bills, resolutions, and funding requests, and keep the Council posted. Members probably noticed that the 5th term Chief Executive took the first opportunity to attend a Q&A session on July 5th, and this is a manifestation of how much store the new Chief Executive set by the relationship between the two branches. The CE undertook to build a regular communication mechanism. I'm only too pleased, together with the Vice Chair, to bridge the gap between the two branches and create favorable atmosphere for communication. There are no lack of issues on the government's plate. I hope that the Chief Executive and her team to hold true to her pledges of being innovative, interactive, and collaborative, and communicate with members of different political persuasions, build a platform for dialogue, improve livelihood, and take forward economic development in the overall interest of Hong Kong. Finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Secretariat and Legal Service Division for their assistance over the past year, and also my thanks to all of our colleagues for their support and contribution. I now take questions from the floor.
想問翻呢，就係啱啱。
We mentioned that only 6 bills were tabled in the first half of this year. Are there any figures for comparison? Is it similar comparing to the previous term or fewer? And also regarding the few number of bills being tabled, has it to do with the new term of LegCo? Well, we can further explore the figures for comparison, but according to the established practice and the relationship between the executive and the legislature, last term we were able to complete almost all the bills except the medical registration bill and the private columbarium bill, and these 2 bills had to go through the complete legislative procedures again. And I think this is partially the reason why in the beginning of a new term of LegCo, the number of bills that could be passed would be fewer, and that's one reason. And this is also the first session of the LegCo term, and this is also the final year of Mr. Leung's term in office. And in previous sessions, relevant bills have been tabled. And this is the first session of this term. And he also followed the timetable in tabling other bills. If I remember correctly, last term altogether the government submitted more than 90 bills, and in the end we passed 93 bills. So divided by 4, it means roughly 24 to 28 bills passed per year. And that's roughly more or less the same as the bills tabled this year. They tabled 28 bills this year. So, in fact, this is nothing unusual for this legislative session in terms of the number of bills tabled. But as Madam Chair mentioned just now, in our report, we already reiterated that the bills should be tabled in the Council as soon as possible so that members have time to examine the bills and so that we can have a full discussion at the bills committees.
You think LegCo has not been running as smoothly as you hope, and who do you think should take the responsibility for this? Perhaps Mr. Kwok could share his views on this as well. And also, looking ahead, do you think LegCo could perhaps be more efficient in future now that Carrie Lam, if it can improve its relationship with Carrie Lam and her administration? Thank you.
Okay, I think generally speaking, we have to admit that over the past years, the relationship between the administration and the legislature are quite tense. And the responsibility are, of course, both sides have to be responsible for that. And as I've mentioned in my speech, administration and the legislature should look into our own role and see how to make the work move forward in an appropriate way. Well, of course, I would criticize, especially when I look at the first year. There are still filibustering in the Finance Committee and also PWSC, and it make most of the work or most of the project in a relatively static position. And of course, I hope that with the new administration, with more communication, things can be smoother.
If I can just add that the effectiveness and efficiency of the Legislative Council is not measured solely by how many pieces of legislation we pass or how many items in the Finance Committee we pass. Sometimes it's about blocking the wrong piece of legislation or blocking the wrong piece of public work that shouldn't cost the Hong Kong people so much. So when you look at the overall effectiveness of LegCo, I think you've got to look at the whole picture. And if you look at the items, for example, in the Finance Committee, you would see that the actual amount involved in each item is actually quite large, and larger than before. So the dollar amount of each of the Finance Committee items is actually quite high. That, in its turn, would attract more questions, because the legislators involved would have to ask more questions about why you're spending $5 billion here and $50 billion here. Those questions would come naturally as each of the items become much more complex. So I've explained this point to the Chief Secretary, and he said that he understood that the items are becoming more complex, and so are legislation. So I think you've got to look at it in that context. So overall, I think the Legislative Council is doing its job, and that one has to take into account the matters that we have looked into. And if you look at all the select committees, all the bills committees, subcommittees that we've set up, in fact, I think we are working extremely hard in the past year. Yeah.
Just now, Sari mentioned that the Legislative Council should have a regular exchange with the mainland. Is there any plan, as chair of the House Committee, will there be more exchanges with the mainland in relation to members of the select committees and other panels and committees? Before responding to your question, I'd like to add to Dennis's comment. To quote from Mr. President, when working with Mr. Kwok, I'd like to seek common ground with him, and we have divergent views in this council. We also have members from across the political spectrum. And fortunately, in this legislative session, we have held a gathering with members across the political spectrum. And in relation to the liver transplant incident, I discussed with Dennis, if necessary, we can take this forward in the council. And I recall that at the meal gathering, we thought about how we can enhance our communication with the mainland and regularize the liaison mechanism. Because it's been 20 years since Hong Kong has been returned to China, and even the duty visit to Dongjiang caused widespread concern. it's good that we attract public attention, but then Hong Kong is part of China, and the legislature is an important organ of the Hong Kong SAR. And yet our exchange with the mainland is still considered to be so special and so rare. As chair of the House Committee, I do hope that in the near future we can have more exchanges on our affairs. Perhaps in terms of different policy spheres, different panels may apply to have duty visits with mainland. And I think that if the issue is of public interest and if necessary, I believe that the chairman of panels will be making such requests. As, for example, for the Bond Connect, if we can have the Shenzhen Hong Kong Stock Connect put together, these are projects close to the heart of Hong Kong people, and also some livelihood projects as well. And this year we only had one duty visit. It was a successful one. And I hope that there will be more duty visits in the future. So picking up on my last point, we had our differences for the Finance Committee and Public Works Subcommittee. Well, about the situations of what I called filibustering. Perhaps the deputy chair may not agree with me. He may not regard it as filibustering, but judging from the figures, when it comes to the FC, PWSC, and ESC items, the time spent on discussing individual items actually was longer, and the items approved were fewer than before. And this also attracted quite some concern in the construction industry. But members also understand that the Council's time is limited, and perhaps the members' concern can get an understanding of the issues on other or through other avenues. It may help reduce time in discussing the items. In the long term, I believe that for FC, PWSC, and ESC, we'll need to make better time arrangement, because we have members from the different constituencies, and the items received are more complicated, and the time allocated to the PWSC, ESC, and FC have been quite insufficient, such that we need to have additional meetings. So next year, when we draw up our timetable, we may need to allocate appropriate time slots for these meetings.
I feel that if the chairman and vice chairman of the House Committee come from two different parties, certainly it would be positive in our communication with the administration. We started off, we got off to really a bad start because of the interpretation of the basic law, and the atmosphere in the council was really bad. It is the first time for the Madam Chair and myself to be the Chair and Vice Chairman. There are so much that we have to discuss in order to identify a solution. In terms of the operation of the Council, and in terms of a breach between the Council and the administration, indeed, there is such a breach. And when we meet the CS, we can express our concerns to the CS. As I said in English, in the Finance Committee, the funding requests are of a colossal sum, and members have a lot more questions for the administration. It should not be regarded as filibustering when members put questions. This is what I told the administration. As regards the duty visit to the mainland of China, Dongjiang Water is a practical issue under a panel. I think members would find these kind of visits acceptable. It would be hard for me to say whether the whole council should be paying a visit to the mainland. It all depends on the subject matters under the panel and see whether we need to pay a visit to the mainland. That is far more pragmatic. I understand you have regular meetings with the CS, and we have a new administration taking over from the old administration. The CS is Mr. Matthew Cheung. Do you think that there is a difference in terms of the importance attached to LegCo? What difference does it make under the new administration? Now, when Mr. Cheung was appointed as CS, we have contact with him, and Mr. Cheung is very good at his words. Now we meet the CS on a weekly basis under the helm of Mr. Leung, or under the helm of Mrs. Carrie Lam. And Mr. Cheung has always been an official with the gift of the gab. Mrs. Carrie Lam showed us by action that she attaches importance to the relationship between the executive and the legislature. She attended a Q&A session on the 5th of July, and also she had specific demands, 4 areas of demands on her team. I don't think we can make a comparison between the two. Even before Mr. Leung took office, there were councillors who demanded his resignation. I think both do have the responsibilities there. Now, for now, I haven't seen any LegCo members demanding that she step down, although some members would boycott any activities involving the CE. That remains a fact. In the days to come, as Mrs. Lam said, I would like to have more communication. We're being pragmatic as councillors, and we should not raise objection for the sake of objection. We should scrutinize everything in a rational manner. Well, a moment ago, you mentioned the FC, PWSC, ESC encountering filibustering. When the government puts together the agenda, there may be some filibustering members who said that the administration would prioritize some of the controversial items first, and that is the reason why there is a gridlock there. Right, let me say this. We keep saying to the CS that the controversial items should be put last. Now, at the ESC, the CS, Ms. Matthew Cheung, did put some of the controversial items last, and some of the items they come before the controversial ones were passed almost immediately. Now, if you try to steadfastly keep the controversial items there to counteract your demand, like what C.Y. Leung did, that would only be counterproductive. That would only stall the matters even more. So we told the CS as much. When I met Mr. Matthew Cheung, it seems that he is more relaxed. He talked so much, and he talked about the items at the top of priority, and he said that the bureau director should not leave the lobbying to anybody else, and have to be hands-on. There are some members who would raise so many questions on public works, like Dr. Edward Yu and Mr. Di Chu. They set up meetings and explained to them the nitty-gritty about the public work projects. Now, this is what Mr. Matthew Cheung would like to do, and he would be instructing the AAs to lobby the members' assistants to make them aware of the details. Now, he's really passionate about it. I hope that this will continue into the future. I hope that the administration would communicate more with members in terms of priority of the bills and the agenda items. There is a need for communication. Indeed, we have 70 different views from 70 different members. And if you add the government in the mix, there would be 100 different views easily. So we have to identify ways of prioritizing the businesses. I cited an example earlier. I remember one time I talked with Dr. or Professor Sophia Chan. She was Undersecretary at the time. Now she's the Secretary. I said there are so many issues in the FHB. Why did she have to prioritize the advertising on the cigarette packages? To me, it is effective to curb smoking with the larger advertisements on the cigarette packages, but it would take quite a long time to get through this. And it's not just a question, an issue with the ESC or the PWSC. We have to consider the bills as well. Like what we said in our meeting with the new CS, we hope that for the FC, PWSC, and ESC, they might wish to exchange views with members from different political spectrum regarding the priority of the businesses. Now, if you take the MPF offsetting first, certainly that would give rise to a lot of different opinions. The key thing is communication. And this is the beginning of the new administration. Do you think that the atmosphere has become more relaxed? And Mrs. Carrie Lam said that she will ask her team to meet members on a more regular basis. Have you got a timetable meeting with the CE and her officials? She hasn't approached me, but there are bureau directors who approached the PANDAM members and discussed some issues.
As to whether we have a regular meeting with members from different political parties, I haven't heard of this, but of course welcome it. I recall when the Chief Executive attended the questions and answers session on the 5th of July, she personally said that she would like to set up liaison channels with different political parties. So far, we have not been approached by Mrs. Lam, but in all fairness, she has just taken up this post, and we need to give her some time to deal with different issues. And we look forward to the regular channels, communication channels with the Chief Executive. As to whether we have seen any immediate change in government officials, I believe that it's a good start for the new administration. And Mrs. Carrie Lam has shown sincerity in visiting districts and communicating with members. But when it comes to more challenging and controversial issues, it will depend on the interactions between the administration and the legislature. I think the co-location arrangement will be the first controversial issue to be handled by Mrs. Carrie Lam. This will be a test for her. In the next legislative session, will you be running for the election of chairman of the House Committee? And would the pro-establishment camp consider swapping seats with the deputy chair so as to show sincerity to the Pan-Democrats? In September, the Pan-Democratic camp will discuss about the chairmanship, and I think that it would depend on the resolution and whether there will be any switching of seats. We don't think that the deputy chair and chair of the Finance Committee should be taken up by the by loyalists. And we don't believe that those positions should be taken up by members from the pro-establishment camp through or for years of the term. We don't think it's fair. For the pro-establishment camp, before the council meeting in the next legislative session, we'll hold a meeting on the division of work, and by then we will make the announcement on the division of work. When working with Dennis, well, we'll try to find the common ground, and we may differ on our views on filibustering, but it's not easy to seek common ground. And last time, we failed to forge consensus. But in terms of division of work at the level of panel and committees, well, you see that Dennis is deputy chair of the committee, and also for different panels and bills committees, the positions are taken up by the Pan Democrats. As to whether we can make some mutual concession, it will be a challenge, because our members, some of our members, do believe that, at least in their eyes or in the eyes of the public, some members have been filibustering for the sake of filibustering, and some members have been doing nothing but moving motions to adjourn the meeting. So I don't think that they'll be opposing to items relating to our economy. At least that was the case in the past. But this year I heard that they could be objecting to the AIIB item as well. So we'll continue with this task. For Starry, last Friday during the House Committee meeting, there was a controversy about Liu Xiaobo's motion, and the Pan Democrats would like to discuss the topic, but you rejected in the end. And Dennis, how would you respond to Starry's refusal to call for a meeting? Last Friday, because order could not be resumed at the meeting and we were unable to complete all the items at the House Committee, and I find it regrettable. We allocated 2 hours for the meeting of the House Committee last week, and judging from experience, 2 hours should be sufficient in handling all the items of the House Committee in general. However, when it came to Mr. Ted Hoi's request made according to Section 16(4), I noted that we were approaching to the scheduled end time of the meeting, and it was 4 minutes past 4 o'clock, according to the Secretariat. I then decided to draw a line. Following that, I needed to proceed to vote on the motion so that the President would know the view of the House Committee. And I think that we're familiar with the practice of the House Committee. In terms of drawing a line and the voting arrangement, we need to strike a balance. Of course, after I drew a line, some members were aggrieved, and they refused to proceed to vote on the motion, and we therefore could not complete all the items. I also received letters from members asking for an additional meeting before the council meeting on Wednesday. But I've noted that because on this occasion the House Committee was adjourned because of the issue of order not being resumed in the meeting, and I also make reference to our previous arrangements. Usually, at the next House Committee meeting, we'll deal with the outstanding issues, and yet that was the last House Committee meeting for this session, and the request came from 26 members only, and I consulted all members in relation to this request to call for an additional meeting. The majority view was that members do not agree to an additional meeting on Wednesday. The meeting was adjourned because order could not be resumed. And if we held an additional meeting, a wrong message would be sent, such that such chaos may occur once again. So having regard to our established practice and members' views, I have decided not to have another meeting of the House Committee before Wednesday. Of course, the Pan Democrats have different opinion because we're concerned about the Liu Xiaobo incident. The the motion was moved under 16.4, and some members already pressed the button before the line was drawn, and yet members were not able to express their views, and I also find it regrettable. At the same time, I understand the plight of the chair of the House Committee. The problem is we must hand over the room to the Finance Committee for their meeting at 4:45. So I think it also had to do with the FC as well. Why couldn't the FC schedule the meeting at say 15 minutes after the HC had been adjourned instead of 4:45? Because, well, there could be problems. For example, we did not expect things to go wrong when Mr. Abraham Shack voted. There could be something ad hoc, some problems causing the meeting to be longer. We hope that the FC can be more flexible. Instead of calling for a meeting at 4:30 on the dot, it could be 10 or 15 minutes after the adjournment of the HC meeting, so that we won't be confined to adjourning the meeting at a certain time. We still hope that we can discuss Liu Xiaobo and other outstanding items. And I also think that the FC should review its practice. And that evening at 6:30, many members were supposed to go on the visit of the Liaoning, vessel, and therefore that was also a consideration.
Well, you said a moment ago that the government should introduce the bills as soon as possible, but what about the co-location of immigration facilities? Would you advise the administration to bring forth the bill as soon as possible? When you met the CS, did he say that on less controversial issues, they would be given high priority for easier passage? Right? If I may take the question in reverse order, the CS undertook to communicate with members from different political spectrum. He approached us. I'm sure that he did likewise with the Pan-Dem members. According to him, he would be getting in touch with members of different political parties. Now, he has to communicate with different members, and different parties would have their views regarding priorities of different items. So I hope that he would take into account the views of different parties and come up with a common ground. Co-location of immigration facilities, we hope that the administration would introduce the bill as soon as possible, because if the XRL is commissioned on time, it's going to be good for society. It would be good to meet the expectations of the members of the public if we can bring about the best benefits from the XRL, and this will facilitate exchanges between Hong Kong and the mainland, and this is getting the worth of the investment. Right. You shift the focus. Co-located facilities, this is going to be the controversy for the next session. We've pushed the administration for a long time as to how soon they will introduce the bill. but they kept really tight-lipped about it. Maybe they just released the information to Singtao Daily, because from that newspaper we learned about how the jurisdiction would be given to the mainland authorities. I don't want to dwell on the details here, except to say that we'd like to have a co-location in accordance with the basic law. This is dear to the hearts of members. The government should not say that if you do not get this passed by such and such a time, there would be consequences. They tried this many times. They try to threaten members with these deadlines, that this is going to be counterproductive. The whole process would be even more prolonged and painstaking. I hope the administration would not resort to this kind of trick ever again, because it doesn't work. The administration should explain to us how the proposal would be in keeping with the basic law and to assuage members' concerns. Now, we have to be, there are emotional aspects, there are rational aspects, there are views expressed by members and members of the public that you may not agree, but you have to bear in mind that the members do have the emotional side and the rational side, and we have to appreciate that in engaging in policy debates, we have to have regard to both sides. Members may have a lot more questions regarding issues to do with the mainland, and some members may be more cautious in putting their questions. Now, on the question of Liu Xiaobo or Li Bo, some members may put questions and they may be more wary, and this is understandable. I don't think you should jump to the conclusion that they are in the wrong and they're being irrational. Now, this is not really the case. Nothing can be further from the truth. Now, the fact that members are putting more questions about projects to do with that would involve on the mainland side, I don't think the government should not view these members with tinted glasses, because they have their own points of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, 唔該晒。
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.